In 1543, a man sat at a gambling table in Suzhou. The candles burned low, the wine had been low for hours. His name was Wang Xilin, and by the time the sun rose, his family would lose something more precious than gold. His father had spent 16 years building the most beautiful garden in China. His father had been a scholar official, a man who gave up everything for a piece of swampy land by the canal. His father had called it the humble administrator's garden, not as humility, but as an insult to the court that had beaten him, exiled him, stripped him of everything. And now, one night, one roll of dice, let me tell you what had happened. Wang Xiancheng, the father, died in 1539. He left behind his garden, his legacy, and his son. A son who, historians tell us, had a weakness for the tables, for the clatter of ivory on wood, for the promise that fortune could change in an instant. About 4 years after his father's death, Wang Xilin found himself at a private game. His opponent was a wealthy merchant from the Changgate district, a man named Xu Shaoquan. Old Xu was a serious gambler, but more importantly, he was a patient one. He had watched the young Wang drink too much, stay too late, lose his caution, and he had a plan. Stakes were set, the entire garden, all of it. Now, here's where the story gets interesting, because the original account comes not from some novelist, but from a man whose own ancestor was the winner. His name was Shupi, and he wrote it down in a book called Zhixiaolu, Notes on Things Worth Knowing, years later. Let me read you what he wrote, because the words matter. 曾叔祖少权，以千金与其子赌，曰六色皆非者胜。My great-uncle Shao Quan wagered 1,000 taels of silver against his son. The bet, whoever rolled all red would win. 6 dice, standard dice. The rule was simple. Roll all 6s and you win the garden. But here's what Wang Xilin didn't know. One of those dice had been specially prepared. Every side painted right. The game went on. Hours passed. Old Xu called for wine, called for musicians, called for courtesans. The air filled with incense and laughter, and slowly, carefully, he waited. As Xu Shupi wrote, 赌酒，忽既敬酒，丝竹并作，四其卷，因以六面皆非者一致。The game had been going on for so long. Then Xu called for girls and wine, for music and song. And when his opponent's attention wandered, when the candles gathered and the hour grew late, he secretly swept in the rigged die and made his roll. All red. 四座大话，不孝子枉然着策，缘遂归许氏。The whole table erupted, but young Wang, drunk and confused, couldn't even understand what had happened. The garden was gone. One night, one swamp, and 500 years of history changed forever. The Xu family took their prize. They moved into the pavilions and crossed the bridges, under the willows and past the lotus ponds. For 5 generations, the Xu family lived in the humble administrator's garden. But here's the tragedy Xu Shupi recorded. The winner's family didn't exactly flourish either. Houses built on gambling wealth rarely stand straight. Within a century, the Xu family's fortunes declined. The garden fell into ruin. The famous halls crumbled. The famous views grew wild. By 1631, less than 90 years after that rigged dice roll, the eastern section of the garden had been sold off entirely. A new owner named Wang Xinyi bought it and built his own estate there, which he called the Return to the Fields Garden. The original garden, the real humble administrator's garden, was already dying. And what of Wang Xiling, the man who lost everything? Shupi records that he met an even worse fate. His descendants, impoverished, disgraced, fell so low that one of them became a funeral trumpeter. In old China, this was one of the most lowly professions imaginable. The man who gambled away a masterpiece ended his bloodline as beggars and outcasts. The Chinese have a saying, 富不过三代. Wealth never survives 3 generations. But Wang Xiling's story is more brutal than that. He destroyed it in one night. And the garden would pass through many more hands, suffer many more woes. The Xu family held it for about a century, then someone else bought it, then someone else. The walls stand the same, the lotus died and was replanted. The willows were cut and grew back. But that night in 1543, that single rigged roll of dice set everything in motion. In the next episode, we'll meet the woman who would become the garden's true owner, even though she never truly possessed it. Her name was Xu Can, and she wrote 246 poems about this garden. But her husband bought it and was exiled before he ever saw it. And she followed him to the frozen north, carrying her words with her. The humble administrator's garden has a strange power. It breaks everyone who touches it. Stay with me.